Sandra Anderson was an amateur dog handler from Michigan who specialized in training cadaver dogs. In 1994, she rescued Eagle, a Doberman and German short-haired pointer mix, and her life changed forever. Sandra started to train up Eagle, and it immediately became apparent that he had a special talent for being able to sniff out human remains. Within just a few years, he gained a reputation for being one of the best cadaver dogs in the world, an absolute expert in detecting very old and very hidden human remains that no other human or dog could, and he earned the nickname Sherlock Bones. Sandra Anderson founded Canine Solutions Inc., a dog training and search company, and later became director of the Great Lakes Search and Rescue Canine Unit in Michigan, which was a volunteer network. Her canine star Eagle had a sense of smell estimated to be about 200,000 times stronger than a human's. He had such a special gift that Sandra felt his skills transcended the bounds of science. The pair seemed to have their own special language that only they could understand, and they would move around the sites in sync with each other. Sandra and Eagle were featured in news articles and TV shows and toured the country giving demonstrations and running training courses. Working alongside the Michigan Archaeological Society, Eagle detected ancient burial sites, including 3 believed to date back to around 1200 AD, and he became the only dog in the world certified to locate ancient human remains. But it was in the world of forensics where Sandra and Eagle really shined. Over the years, they worked on over 1,000 cases around the world, from local crime scenes to murders and missing person cases to international war crimes. They traveled to Bosnia to help locate mass graves, were sent to Ground Zero in New York City after 9/11, and became the go-to for cold cases and unsolvable crime scenes. Eagle became one of only 3 dogs in the entire United States with international certification in forensic detection at the time. To law enforcement officers and grieving family members of victims, Sandra and Eagle were like heroes or legends. But Eagle's almost mythical talents would soon prove to be too good to be true. In July 1999, the very gruesome case of Mayvano Kupaza made headlines in Wisconsin. The 25-year-old woman's dismembered and skinned body parts were found in plastic bags along the rural shores of the Wisconsin River. Her killer had stripped the flesh from her face to prevent identification, but forensics experts carefully examined the remains and created one of the first ever 3D facial reconstructions, which was then released to the media. Friends immediately recognized the likeness to their missing friend Mayvano, and her identity was confirmed through fingerprint analysis. Mayvano's cousin, Peter Kupaza, a 40-year-old schoolteacher, became the prime suspect after friends reported that she had accused him of sexual abuse, but police did not have enough physical evidence to prove that he was the murderer. His apartment had been searched, but it appeared to be spotless. So Sandra and Eagle were brought in. Eagle made his way through Peter Kupaza's property and alerted at the bathroom doorknob, bathtub tap, a closet doorknob, some light switches, then a cutting board and knives in the kitchen. For prosecutors, this was enough, but the defense attorneys thought it was completely absurd for a murder case to be built around one dog's sense of smell. In order to prove Eagle's credibility, Sandra demonstrated in court in front of the judge and jury how Eagle could accurately differentiate between human blood and animal blood. She set up 3 identical paper bags, one containing a handkerchief dabbed with a few drops of the district attorney's own blood pricked from a finger moments earlier. The other 2 bags contained pork blood and beef blood. Eagle easily picked out the bag that contained the human blood. Eagle has no unsuccessful hits, Sandra Anderson said in court. It was the first time in US history that a dog had been treated as an expert witness in a murder trial. However, a state crime lab specialist testified that he could only confirm 2 actual blood spots in Peter Kupaza's apartment, one belonging to the victim, the other to Peter himself, and stated that he couldn't confirm that there were traces of blood on some of the items Eagle had indicated. Peter Kupaza's defense team argued that a dog couldn't be considered scientific proof, but the judge disagreed and left it up to the jury to decide how much weight to give to Eagle's testimony. In the end, the jury found Peter Kupaza guilty of first-degree murder of his cousin Mayvano. In December the same year, 37-year-old Tracy Islam had just dropped off divorce papers to her husband Azazul in Dearborn, Michigan. She was then supposedly going to take a solo trip to Europe for some soul-searching, but Tracy never came back. Azazul told their children that their mother had decided to stay in England for good. Tracy's sister reported her as missing. Then, human limbs were found behind a dumpster in Dearborn, while a torso with no head was discovered in Toledo about an hour away. Police suspected the body parts belonged to Tracy Islam, and that she'd been killed by her estranged husband. but because they couldn't prove that Tracy was even dead, they couldn't obtain a search warrant. Police paid Azazul a visit anyway, and to their surprise, he invited them into his house without hesitation. He showed them around, leading them into his basement, where the floor had been freshly and quite sloppily painted. He explained to detectives that he was renovating and planning to sell the house. Azazul put on such an act of confidence that he even agreed to have a cadaver dog brought into the house. Sandra and Eagle were called in, and immediately, Eagle began indicating that there were traces of blood present despite the strong odor of paint and bleach in the basement. He began barking and alerting at several spots on the floor, the rug, and the wall. He also circled the washing machine, barking loudly. Investigators checked under the washer and found a saw blade covered in what appeared to be blood. Eagle's reactions were enough to get detectives their warrant, and the traces of blood in the basement as well as the human limbs and torso were confirmed to belong to Tracy Islam. Strangely enough, the blood on the saw blade did not match Tracy's DNA, but there was still plenty of evidence to convict Azazul Islam of first-degree murder. By 2001, Eagle's prowess for detecting hidden human remains caught the attention of the Panama Truth Commission, a group dedicated to investigating the atrocities committed under dictator Manuel Noriega from 1968 to 1989. Sandra and Eagle were flown to Panama, reportedly for a contract worth $100,000 to help locate hidden mass graves. The pair searched sites believed to be final resting places for victims of political repression, and almost everywhere they went, Eagle would indicate by barking and bone fragments would be dug up. On one occasion, he barked at a cracked plaster wall. When Sandra chipped away at it, she found human teeth embedded inside. Forensic anthropologists on site were stunned. Eagle's success rate was so remarkable that the Panamanian government considered putting him on a postage stamp. In June 2001, 42-year-old Benita White was at a zoo in Lansing, Michigan with her 5-year-old daughter at a kid's birthday party. Then out of nowhere, a single gunshot rang out and the bullet pierced Benita's heart, then exited through her right side. Sadly, she did not survive. No further shots were fired and nobody saw the shooter. Police determined that the shooter had used a high-powered rifle and had fired from at least 120 yards away. The prime suspect was Benita's estranged husband, Artis White, a state trooper, but with no gun, no shell casing, and no witnesses, no suspects were ever formally accused. Lansing police searched the area thoroughly with their own search dogs as well as metal detectors twice, but nothing ever turned up. That's when Sandra Anderson and Eagle were brought in, and within just 5 minutes, Eagle found the spent round under some leaves, but curiously, it didn't have any blood or tissue on it. In 1980, Charita Thomas was just 20 years old when she disappeared in Oscoda, Michigan. She had just gotten engaged and was on her way to pick up her baby daughter from the sitter. But then her car broke down and she was last seen getting into a blue pickup truck with a white male. Lead Detective Sergeant Alan McGregor and Officer Mark David believed that Charita was the victim of a racially motivated hate crime. They spent 2 decades trying to solve her disappearance, and over the years grew close with Charita's family. But despite their efforts, the case stayed open and unsolved. In 2001, new information led investigators to the Huron National Forest in northern Michigan, to an area where they believed they would finally find Charita's remains. They heard about Sandra Anderson and her amazing cadaver dog Eagle, and so they requested for their assistance. Sandra agreed and didn't ask for payment beyond fuel, food, and lodging. During the first 2 searches in June 2001, Eagle worked his magic and found human bones, jewelry, and pieces of clothing. Investigators were ecstatic. After 2 decades of dead ends, it seemed like they'd finally be able to lay Charita to rest. Her family was informed of the good news, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was hope. The search site was closed during winter, and the evidence was sent to the FBI for testing. However, none of the bones that Eagle had found matched Charita Thomas. In fact, they didn't even come from the same person. Tests revealed that the bone fragments belonged to 3 different individuals, possibly 2 young girls who had gone missing in the 1960s and a young man from the early 1970s. Investigators were bewildered. Had they accidentally stumbled across a serial killer's dumping ground? On April 17, 2002, the search for Charita Thomas's body resumed. Everyone involved was still hopeful, and miraculously, Eagle once again was able to sniff out more human bones. At one point in the day, Sandra called out to Officer Mark David, saying Eagle had had a hit near a creek. Officer David had just been in that spot on his hands and knees sifting through the mud, and was positive there was nothing there. But he followed Sandra anyway. He watched her kneel down, reach toward the ground, then saw her hand go up her pant leg. It looked like she had pulled something out of her boot. Then a second later, she picked out what appeared to be a human knuckle bone out of the mud, claiming Eagle had found it. That same day, forensic technician Jennifer Patchen experienced something similar. Sandra and Eagle had just discovered a 2-inch scrap of carpet in an area that Jennifer had already searched meticulously. She couldn't understand how she could have missed it, unless it hadn't been there before. Both David and Patchen were disturbed by what they had seen. They shared their suspicions with each other and their superiors, but there wasn't enough proof yet to outright accuse Sandra of any wrongdoing. They agreed to keep a very close eye on Sandra during the search the following day. By mid-afternoon on April 18th, Sandra called out to share that Eagle had picked up a scent. Jennifer Patchen joined her beside a shallow stream and watched as Sandra knelt down and unmistakably put her hand in her boot. Jennifer lunged forward and grabbed Sandra's hand. The two women had a physical struggle, and the chaos attracted the attention of the other investigators. When Sandra Anderson's hand was finally pried open, it was revealed she was holding a piece of bone. Her car was then searched and a small bag of human bone fragments was found. She was immediately arrested. For the officers who had spent years working on the Cherita Thomas case, this was not a moment for celebration. For lead detective Sergeant McGregor, it felt like 20 years of work had gone down the drain. Tampering with evidence meant that any chance of prosecution in Cherita's case was essentially gone. The family who had been so hopeful now had to be told that the evidence was potentially all fake. Sandra Anderson didn't go quietly when she was arrested. Witnesses recall her shouting, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who you're dealing with?" She was indignant and defiant, clinging to her reputation and 17-year-long career as a celebrated dog handler. The allegations against Sandra that she had been planting evidence sent shockwaves through law enforcement across the country. What could this mean for all the cases that she and Eagle had helped solve? Defense attorneys rushed to challenge convictions, and up to 50 cases could now potentially be reopened. Meanwhile, Sandra Anderson, once one of the FBI's most trusted cadaver dog handlers, was now the subject herself of a massive federal investigation. A search warrant of her house had FBI agents mortified. Her house was an absolute mess. It was in extreme disarray, and the filth and stench had agents running outside gasping for fresh air. 7 other dogs lived in the house in the squalid conditions, and 2 dogs were in such poor health that they had to be euthanized by the Humane Society. And then the most alarming discovery: thousands of human bone fragments scattered throughout the house. Some stored in drawers, some hidden under piles of clothes. There was zero organization, no labels to identify who any of the bones belonged to. So where did she get all these human bones? As a cadaver dog trainer, Sandra had special access to human remains donated for scientific research purposes. Over the years, she had built a network of morticians and medical examiners who supplied her with bones meant for training purposes. It was now up to the FBI technicians to painstakingly compare the bones found in Sandra's home with the fragments she had supposedly discovered at crime scenes. In November 2003, Eagle, the dog who unknowingly became Sandra's accomplice, died of heart disease before the case made it to court. The deeper the FBI dug, the worse it got. 47 different law enforcement agencies from across the US that had worked with Sandra had to review her past discoveries and determine how accurate those findings actually were. In one missing child case in Florida, the bones Eagle found turned out to be from an unidentified adult. There was a case of a missing motorist after a car crash in Fulton County that Sandra worked on. Eagle had found a severed human toe, but when the man's body was found 2 weeks later, his boots and all 10 toes were intact. Tests revealed that the toe came from a body donated to science in Louisiana, likely supplied to Anderson by a dog training contact. In the Panama case, bones that Eagle had supposedly found in 3 separate locations miles apart from each other turned out to have the same DNA profile and were later traced back to bones found in Sandra's house. On top of that, some of the remains found in Panama turned out to be from Caucasian individuals, not Hispanic victims. In 2002, Sandra had been hired to help identify burial sites at Skunk Hill, a known Native American burial ground in central Wisconsin. She and Eagle spent the day sweeping the area, marking each spot Eagle supposedly detected human remains with a small orange flag. The hill ended up being covered in hundreds of flags. Local archaeologists were stunned. Their research didn't support the existence of a burial ground that large, and the soil itself was just too shallow to hold that many graves. Upon later examination, no human remains were found in any of the areas Sandra had marked. Even wilder was the revelation that Sandra used her own blood to plant evidence. In the Tracy Islam case, the blood found on the saw blade under the washing machine turned out to belong to Sandra Anderson. Evidence like coins and gauze found in other past cases also tested positive for her DNA. The scrap of carpet that had been found in the Huron National Forest was matched to the very same carpet inside Sandra's house. Initially, Sandra claimed that she was innocent. She said it would have been impossible for her to have planted so many bones or buried bones under concrete. She and her supporters insisted she was being targeted due to professional jealousy from other dog handlers and law enforcement officers because they had often failed where she and Eagle succeeded. But after all the discrepancies came to light and Sandra realized that the case against her was airtight, she ended up pleading guilty. In March 2004, 43-year-old Sandra Anderson pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and falsifying evidence. As a part of her plea bargain, she confessed to planting bones and other evidence, then pretending to discover them as genuine. She also admitted that she lied to investigators, falsified reports, and tried to coerce colleagues to also write false reports to corroborate her story after the FBI search of her home. Before her sentencing, Sandra addressed the court, saying, quote, "I lost track of why I was offering my services." She didn't offer any other explanation for her actions. She was sentenced to 21 months in prison and ordered to pay more than $14,500 in restitution to the law enforcement agencies she had deceived. She would also serve 3 years of probation after her release. She asked the judge to delay her prison term, claiming she needed to care for her mother who was about to undergo cancer surgery. However, Sandra's mother herself told the judge that she did not have cancer and did not need any help and described her daughter as a pathological liar. Sandra's request was denied by the judge. Both Peter Kapaza and Azizul Islam, whose murder convictions had relied in part on evidence linked to Sandra Anderson, appealed their cases, but both convictions were ultimately upheld. Thank you so much to our paid supporters: Some Nerd You Don't Know, Matthew the Celt, Francis Boron, Aero Skies, Cindy Chen, and K4 Silver. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for similar strange scammer stories you might not have heard of before. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.